Let's see, because before I could advance.
Yeah.
Now can I advance? No. By now, you should be well familiar with Ansel Adams' work. But you can look at that for a minute more. While I thought at this culminating time, I might just review the birth dates of the artists that we've looked at so that you can put them in a time frame. So Marston Hartley was born 1877. George O'Keeffe was a decade later, 1887. Grant Wood today, that's only 4 years later, 1891. Then Charles Birchfield, we'll end with, 2 years after that, 1893. 2 years after that, Dorothea Lange was born. Ansel Adams wasn't born until the 20th century, 1902. So these are all people who are working simultaneously in different places with different preoccupations. And I brought this in not because I really can't drag myself away from it, but because there was another photograph that I wanted to follow up beyond this one by the new photographer you saw last time, Louis Baltz. And it's this. It's by a Cuban-born artist, Abelardo Morel. And I know there's a new exhibition at MAM of photography, and I wouldn't be surprised that one of the works by Morel that the museum owns might be on display. So I thought you might enjoy knowing about it, because this looks as if it were at first just a kind of a slightly different angle color version of Ansel Adams' painting. But then you look at the surface and it's like, oh, clean that off. The procedure that he uses, he has a tent camera obscura. Camera obscura is like, let's see if I took it off. It was the precursor to a camera where you could do it with a little box, and he does it with a big tent. The image comes in through a small aperture, and in that, then the light rays reverse. It gets projected onto a surface, and everything that was right side up outside then turns up upside down when you look through the camera obscura. But with this tent one, I don't know how this works. It comes in through the tent, and then it hits a mirror, and he projects it down onto the ground. And then this is a photograph of what you see on the ground. So you're seeing the grass, the rubble, the sand of the ground on the location. So you are truly there at the site when you see it this way. It's kind of clever. And most of his time, he works, he's not a landscape photographer. He does this with sites like the Brooklyn Bridge, works of art all over. He just house interiors. So he's interesting to look at his work. So that's Abelardo Morel, Morell. And then an artist had a very short life. About whom there are critics writing in, say, up to about 10 years ago, say that this is a trash artist. And then partly that's the disdain of saying, well, he's liked by everybody, what he does, and therefore, you know, he's too popular, it's too approachable, it can't be really all that good. And there are people who love him. And I didn't ask any of you, did you know him? Because everybody knows. So I'm going to give you something different to start with him. I know we're going to do the American Gothic, even though that's not a landscape, because that is what everyone knows of his. But this is also by him. So here comes a little thumbnail biography of this very complicated man. He was born on a farm in in Iowa. And his father died when he was 10. So his mother took the family up to Minneapolis. And Grant Wood was obviously from the very beginning interested in doing something with his hands and something visual. So he went to a sort of a craft school, studying metalworking at first. And he went to the Minneapolis School of Art for a while. Then subsequently, he went to the Chicago Art Institute to study painting. And he did ceramics, he does metalwork, he did furniture making, he did stained glass windows, and his paintings all fit within about 10 years in his short career. He also was the head in Iowa of the Federal Works Project for Art, helping to arrange murals in many post offices and public buildings in Iowa is a way to support artists. And he co-founded a little arts colony. He taught at the University of Iowa. And before that, he taught in public school. So that's a very varied background. He made this for a hotel. And you can see it's corn. I mean, he wanted to be known as the farmer artist. And I'll show you pictures of him as the farmer artist. The thing is, and he said that he got his inspiration while he was milking cows. The truth is, he never farmed. He never wanted to be on a farm. And that's all just an assumed person. And this is the kind of art he did first. This man, who is going to be most prominent, not just for American Gothic, but for the vehemence with which he talked about the importance of, in the 30s, of what's called regional art, that Americans should not think of themselves as just a province of Europe, that they should be doing something that's authentically, truly American. And the place you are going to find it most authentically American is in the Midwest. He did this while he was studying in France. As a public school teacher, he spent, for 4 summers, he went over to Europe and studied. And he studied at the Académie Julian, the major art school in Paris. Then when he was designing a stained glass window, which was to be manufactured in Munich, he went there. And there he saw another kind of art, the art of the Northern Renaissance and artists like Dürer and Jan van Eyck. And that's going to show up in American Gothic and elsewhere. But so he has a very traditional European-oriented training. And so they're not great works of art, but this is what he was learning. This is, he studied works by Van Gogh, and this is a sort of around in, I would guess, like an 1880s style. Or look at this quick flecking brushwork on this little landscape. Or this one. He studied Impressionism. He worked in an Impressionist manner, completely free, spontaneous. And then you have this. The reason this became so famous, he did this after he finished at the Art Institute. But the Art Institute had annual juried exhibitions, and this painting, American Gothic in 1930, won the 3rd prize. Why it should be famous for being a 3rd prize? It is because this is truly characteristic of him. You can't figure out exactly what the message is. Is this derogatory? Is this derisive? Is this mocking Midwest prudery and old-fashioned anti the new age? Or is this an exaltation of the values of honor, integrity, modesty, hard work that are associated with farms? And at different times in his life, he sort of said it meant one, and sometimes he said it meant the other. So the history of this painting, now I know one person in this class, I don't see her here right now, but she's seen this at the Grounds for Sculpture down in Hamilton, New Jersey. It's about 15 feet high. They stand in front of a backdrop that's like this, and then you have the figures. So it's truly famous if it's there, down with the Monets and the Manets, also in sculpture. He saw this house in a little Iowa town. And evidently it's a style just called Carpenter Gothic. And what evidently struck him was that sort of aspiration in seeing a window that's shaped like a Gothic cathedral window. So it's Carpenter Gothic. And this is his sketch he made of it. Then for his models, who never posed together in the painting, he assembled this from these various pieces. The woman is his sister, Nan, and the man is his dentist. So he had in mind exactly what he wanted. You can see her face is round. I mean, he just builds the woman's face off her as a model. And this is a sketch he did, squaring it up for the final painting. And there are minor differences all the way through the painting. So it's something that you can follow this out and you can see how methodical he is and how perfectionist he is and how he's shifting this slightly over here and changing. Look at the placement of the man's head. Oh, and by the way, here he has a rake instead of a, yeah, just regular rake, not a hay rake. See here how his head is isolated and emphasized by being separate from the building. And here it's compacted into the design. And he makes all sorts of adjustments throughout. So this is totally a creation of his mind. And so very different from his earlier work. Because when he was in Munich, doing the work associated with the stained glass windows, as I say, he went to the museums and for the first time saw Northern Renaissance works. And this is it's just called, we don't know who the man is. It's by a portrait by Hans Memling about 1480. It's just called A Man with a Roman Medal. But that he, for the first time, saw that extremely precise technique in oils. And the sobriety in the face is there. You know, it doesn't have to be a Midwestern integrity. That's Northern European style. And if you just look at the little trees, those are going to be the source of the trees that populate his paintings. So this artist who's like Midwest independent has graduated from French contemporary painting to European Renaissance painting as the source of his inspiration. And behind it all is just as much as in Georgia O'Keeffe or Marsden Hartley, an interest in the formal elements. When you look at the consonants between the shape of those three tines and the sewing on his bib overalls, or the way they were lined, that's a reverse of the window up above, almost everything fits with everything else. Let's see if I do this. Yeah. So there, look the way the part in her hair lines up and carries on then in the tree behind her. Or his steeper curve as opposed to the rounder curve, that more feminine curve in her apron. It's thought out in terms of 20th century design principles, line, shape, and form. So here's his self-portrait from several years later. He's also painting, in this one in particular, is painted on wood. So it's oil painting on wood, which was the Northern Renaissance medium. So he's even using the technique. So that's his self-presentation as the farmer that he wasn't. And only when I was getting this ready did I stop to think, that's so interesting, that windmill just over there. Well, I thought, I just started looking through artist self-portraits and I just plucked out one by Cezanne. But there are very many of them where the artist is looking out because the artist is looking in the mirror and he has his canvas on that part of the image. So now, just in the verticals or slight angles, instead of his easel, you have the windmill. And he's looking out at you as if you were looking in the mirror. Wrong way. And he chose always to wear his bib overalls. I'm afraid when I look at that, it does not look like a man to whom that is anything other than a costume, does it? This I find sort of interesting when you stop to think about it, because he is out there in the land of farmers who would see as right through this, that this is a neatly pressed, not worn, not dirty barn clothes. This is costume. And then here are his landscapes. This one is called Stone City, Iowa, from 1932. And this is what the land looks like around there. So that's the landscape. It's a real place. And the year after he did this painting, he co-founded an artist colony there. It was called Stone City because this is where there used to be great limestone quarries, and it had been a flourishing small city. But with the development of Portland cement, there was no longer a need for limestone. And this city had just fallen into, it was really struggling. You have no hint of any of that actuality of the situation. You would think it is only fields and farms. So it's an imagined past in a highly decorative imaginary landscape. And look at the plunging perspective, especially in the foreground, those little tufts of corn. I think that would be coming up. And then all of a sudden you go over the edge and then you're down into space, who knows where. So it's extremely theatrical. There was another name for work like this that had actually been developed by a German art critic for German painting from the mid-1920s called magical realism, because there was the same sort of like reaction against abstraction by saying, oh no, we're going to have the precision of that meticulous recording of all details. The totality can be a total fiction. but it's going to have that combination with this a sort of microscopic realism. That was the same year as Charles Sheeler painted this. This was a real landscape. That's the Ford Motor Factory at River Rouge. So that's real contemporary, imagined past. That he's saying, this is America. This is what America should be. And what else have you seen this 1930? This Georgia O'Keeffe's Black Mesa. So you just have to keep in mind, those three are absolutely contemporaneous works. I have a detail where you'll be able to see this one a little closer. I think this is 1931, just got to be. In this short career, got to get this right. It's just called Young Corn. Yes, they are. Like children's books illustrations. And what I tore myself away from showing you is that he had also done like little overmantel works that were like colonial primer paintings. He did a whole range of different things, which is another part of his elusiveness. You know, it's like, where's the real Grant Wood? Well, he's obviously, and you can sort of psychoanalyze this, and sometimes some writers will, sometimes they won't, but they say, he doesn't look like a man who belongs like among the men in Iowa. He just doesn't. So there's a quality of role playing in all of it. But this one, to me, I don't know, I must have a thing where I believe every field looks like a human body. But again, you have these great swelling, curving forms and these wonderful little tufted trees, which are like the Memling. Where do you go in this? Yeah, it is like a fantastic children's drawing. No, a drawing in a children's book. One detail. Look how meticulous that is. The whole painting is, it's about 2 feet across, not even 3 feet high. So that's working on a very small scale. And there are 2 children coming to some adult male kneeling in the field. I looked up all the procedure for pre-technology planting of corn, which is, I know, a very difficult crop, but the corn is already up. Before 1850, they did kneel and eat the kernels down in little hillocks of dirt. But maybe this person's supposed to be weeding, but you can't tell. And there's certainly no contemporary technology in this. Plowing. This is owned by the John Deere company. This painting, isn't that appropriate that they have this in their headquarters? And the size of this one, let me see. 30 by 40 inches. So this is somewhat bigger. Now, in the foreground, you have the kind of what's called a walking plow and the steel plowshare, which had gone completely out of fashion in the preceding 10 years to this painting being done, because this was the time of that introduction of tractors. And then you look at that soil. To me, it looks like a little coverlet that is just pulled up, but that plow is going under. The one thing, curiously, like the photographs we saw from the Depression era, is putting the farm so far away. And this one is haying. This is 2 feet. Look at all those little strokes. It's like, oh. And what you have down at the bottom, there's no human actor here. That's a jug. So someone must have, that's the water, for when they're working, but no humanity here. So the people would be themselves seeing images more like this when they're seeing this, oops, in a painting. So it's clear to them, it has to be, if there's a message, it has to be how things were so much better before. A real nostalgia. And that one with Rothstein, where it has to have been just a sort of a way of seeing at the time where you put the building so far away and up just on the horizon. So in that, he's carrying on with something that's current, and among other artists working. This is a very dramatic one, isn't it? It's just called Spring Turning, right? And it's this bird's eye. And there's a horse-drawn plow. Only part of a farm building back there. A few cattle in the field. Those little specks. I amused myself by trying to see if the cast shadows of the trees in the foreground and in the background, if they were all at the same angle. Was he being so careful as to make that as if it were under the same sun, that all of this that we see? And a farm building. Clouds that, curiously enough, look like Marsden Hartley clouds. That just looks like someone wearing tights to me. That's for soil. And this is what Marsden Hartley was doing at this time. This is 1940, 1941, the springtime planting. He did one that was showed spring and fall. He died of pancreatic cancer, and so he, as I said, a really short life. And these are two last works he did. And this must meant to celebrate the end of the Depression, that they're now planting, the fields are fertile, and life begins again. Not for him, but there's no reference ever in any of this to the Depression. And an absolute rejection of work like Ben Shah's, which was urban and showed the real social conditions. So it's an art of fantasy, which he went around lecturing in the Midwest, that this is the authentic art. This is the American art. This is what we should aspire to. He's a complicated guy. I had a great deal of difficulty getting this material together, I have to tell you, because I want to show you everything, absolutely everything. But you don't need to go very far to see a lot of his work. The Whitney has a lot, the Museum of Modern Art has some, and then the largest collection of works by Charles Birchfield are at SUNY Buffalo. There's a museum just called the Birchfield Penny Museum. And I know at least two people here have been there. Chalk and cheese. This is going to be a man also from the Midwest. Now, his whole life was spent around Lake Erie, but as different as conceivably different from Grant Wood. Here he is late in his life. When I asked how many had heard of him, and I got about 3 hands, 4 hands. That's not so bad, 4. In his lifetime, the first one-man exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art was of his work. And he won the Carnegie International Exhibition. He was on prizes after prizes. A very good friend of Edward Hopper, who wrote about him in an article in 1938, and they had friendship formed on that. So he had a stellar career. And nowadays, he's just not very well known at all. And he was an unusual person in his own way, because he does not fit anyone's romanticized notion of what an artist would be like. He was born in Ashtabula. His dad died when he was 5. And his mother moved to another small town. So he grew up without much. Smart kid. Like valedictorian of his class. Drove himself very hard, evidently, in whatever he had passions for. And he couldn't decide between being a writer. His diaries are just wonderful reading. They're very rich, very vivid, and very down-to-earth writing. Or to be a visual artist. Meanwhile, to make money, he worked in the parts department of an auto manufacturer, I think. And after he graduated from school, and on his way to and from school every day, he would sketch. He drew all the time. He had once in the summer made a plan that he was going to draw every flower he saw in his area. He is through and through a landscape artist. There are the few times he does human figures, and he will do townscapes, but it's the world around him. And he, late in life, said, if I had another lifetime, it still couldn't exhaust. I have yet to show everything I see. He was just tremendously responsive to what's around him. What's also different, he was a good family man with 5 children. He made a shed in his backyard where he could paint. He painted from home. His kids would get teased because what's your dad do? He just stays home and paints. But except for 10 years when he worked designing wallpaper, he supported their family just on his art. He never reached out to the art world, not at all. And he worked in a different way. This doesn't look very different, but if I tell you what he's doing, he's painting in watercolor. Almost all his life, he does only watercolors. Now, to get a scale like this on watercolor, he has had to tape together pieces of paper. And how does he do this? He doesn't use runny watercolor. He uses it almost as if it were like tempera, really quite dry. But so he sort of develops his own technique and his own way of working. That's a little watercolor he did of the shed in his backyard. So here's some work from when he went to the Cleveland School of Art, which is where Marsden Hartley started. And he also went to the Birchfield lasted at the National Academy of Design in New York, where Hartley then went. Birchfield lasted for 1 day and left because he knew what he wanted to do, and it didn't fit within that. He was really inspired by Chinese art. And what it was about Chinese art would not so much even be the scrolls. This man, he was so ambitious. His ambitions are so different. He knew Chinese calligraphy. I'm not sure I get this right because I don't know, I can't do it myself, but that the lettering represents entities, concepts, or feelings. They don't represent sounds. like pictographs. And he wanted to create pictographs of his own devising for different moods and for sounds, so that his paintings could give you the scene, the mood, the sound, the complete surround that surrounded him when he made them. Now, these are some of the earlier ones, and these were the ones that were shown at Museum of Modern Art. This one's just, they're all watercolors. This is called Rogue's Gallery, because he just is showing a lineup of drooping, fading sunflowers that are just as big as the building behind them, but they have a very humanoid quality, don't they? Like a Rogue's Gallery, that's his name for it. And they're very decorative. Skies. After the show of his work that was up at the museum up here, I have to say that I want to make sure I get the right images here. I was looking at skies and looking at buildings and looking at trees in a completely different way. But so this one is just called Clearing Sky. And he identified it by the day and by the exact weather conditions. He kept track because he wants these to be meteorologically correct, as well as carry all the mystical meaning he finds in them. So this kind of extreme curves we'll find often, that's his symbol for wind. So it's a very windy day. And from the way the brush strokes go in those trees, you have the idea that you could hear the leaves rustling and the branches going back and forth. It's hard to tell if he has synesthesia or if he's almost like a skin that is nothing but sensory receptivity. But sound is very, very important to him. So the name for this one is The Song of the Katydids on an August Morning. So all those little like checkmark forms, those are the katydids. And that's the sound they're making. An August day where you have the insects, you have cicadas buzzing all over, hot, heavy air. Insect chorus. That's that same year. Now, there's no Northern Renaissance, no contemporary precedent for this. This is coming from the incredible originality of this artist. Yes. And when he has a job, when he's married and has to have more money than he was making working in the auto shop, he designed wallpaper patterns. And you can see that decorative talent is there. Clearing Sky. No, this is Summer Sun. This is 14 inches across. So he goes outside with these. You know, he doesn't bring this back home to do. He's doing it there. And you have the sense of the wind in that center sort of funneling form in the blue-gray. The big tree. This is about 1.5 feet across. So that's that beating sun and the light just radiating from the tree. The heat. So it's really a portrait of the weather conditions. It's not just of the things he sees in nature. Well, then during the 20s, when he's working for this, for the wallpaper designer, then he moved up to the Buffalo area. But he for that period in the 20s, you'd say he was sort of a regionalist artist too. This is still a watercolor. It looks like an oil, but he begins to show contemporary scenes, not just the natural world. Or this one has parallels in photography. A day in midwinter. This is the end of the day. And you see the workmen trudging uphill with their lunchboxes empty. So this is the world of the Depression. This is owned by the Montclair Art Museum. And it's just a day in midwinter. And it's the day out the back window from his little shed studio. And that is a sufficiency for a work of art because it's what he sees. And he loves the in-between times. Between daylight and sunup, when the weather is just changing, he loves slush. Look at this, the snow is melting, so it leaves those footprints there. He loves it can be an ordinary scene. Who would think, why not turn this into a fantasy? Why not make this into like a storybook scene? No, it's just fine the way it is to him. This was called an April mood. So the April showers. Later in his life, his religious faith shows up in many of his works. He'll frequently show three trees, or there'll be a triad, and generally three vertical accents, as if those were the three crosses. And here, of course, is the spring rain and trees that look just as barren as could be. Reaching. The Song of the Telegraph. Later in his life, he went back to many of the works that he still owned from his what he called his golden year, when he was in 1917. He said that's when he did his very best work. And he had many of those watercolors, and he picked them up again and added paper to them, and then redid them and developed them into something larger, as this is one of those. And he wrote about this. And among the things he said in this way he keeps his notes, I can't remember the name of the street. If I look at my notes here, he'll say, on this day, he went on the south side of X Street to look at the telegraph poles because he wanted to see where the knots were in the wood. And then he wanted to suggest the humming of the telegraph wires. So he's trying to communicate. Now that's a modern scene, and he wants to put in the sound of the modern word. And he said that painting sort of, he often had the sense that the painting sort of took over and came out of him, that he didn't have much control over it. One thing he said he enjoyed when he was doing this is that he saw those crows begin to emerge as the motif. And they reminded him of birds in the north. When he was young, he fantasized about how wonderful it would be to go to Norway. And this was a reminder of his youth coming back to him. And then I will read you this. Well, here's a little Most likely to give trouble will be the telegraph line itself. It's easy to invent a multitude of symbols representing the humming of a telegraph pole. But because it's easy, there's the danger of overdoing it. And he liked the white wind motifs, running like white fire over the dead, bleached out grass. Now, isn't that poetry? So you think of that as fire, white fire across the grass at the bottom. So you see, he's a landscapist. He's also a mystic. I will have done this. I will have not brought enough because I was so wanted to bring you everything I brought you to view. But I will then tell you about this particular one. I wrote out from his diary. This one is called Oncoming Spring. And it's from 1954. It's 3.5 feet across. And it's at the Birchfield Penny Museum. He said he'd had this theme in mind for years. He wanted something where the two things that ordinarily don't go together, you find them in the natural world. There had to be some conjunction of opposite things battling against one another. And he heard the weather report on this day. My theme was the clashing of spring and winter in the woods. Sunlight and wind penetrating the deep gloom of winter. So he'd been waiting for the weather forecast. Something that looks as mystical as this is based on an absolute physical reality for him to do the painting. So he got this, and then he says he'd hardly set up his easel when a thunderstorm arose. So he got out his huge beach umbrella and his raincoat, and then to protect his legs, he put his painting portfolio, and the wind made it blow against his legs, so it kept his legs dry, and he continued to paint. Watercolor. So I painted with my nose almost on the paper, with thunder crashing, boughs breaking, and rain falling in torrents. A glorious few hours when I seemed to become part of the elements. When I was done at late afternoon, the picture was complete. It seems as if it had materialized under its own power. So he's in an utterly altered, completely absorbed state, creating this. And you see that curve, that's his personal symbol for wind, the wind blowing in, surrounded by the sunlight, blowing away the dark winter. What an imagination. An imagination that comes out of such concrete reality, sensual reality. It just awes me. Toward the end of his life, the works became more and more mystical. I think they're the ones that are more often seen now because they are a little bit more flamboyant and they are more obviously mystical. And this would be a good example of them. And this is just called the Four Seasons, that there are motifs from all four seasons of the year combined in this painting. The snow, and then there's some blossoms just coming up through the snow, and you have the red for fall. So this is a more complex one, or for my taste, they're a little over elaborated, but these are just some to look at from earlier. So you see how many selves he had, but they're all art selves and they're all him, unlike Grant Wood. No, I guess not. Let's see. Will you go out and look at a drizzly day differently when you have seen something like this? To see there's something in that to appreciate, to enjoy? Early spring in the woods. There's often sort of anthropomorphic elements in them too, like the sort of a maw in the one on the tree on the right. And I think this is sound, the sound of insects in the woods. Now that's a long way from that rogues gallery with those drooping sunflowers, isn't it? And there are other varieties of this art that I didn't put in. So that's what I have for this series. I did bring in a notepad. You can do me a favor